everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so we'll get started. I'm Ashley Batson. I'm currently serving as treasurer for the Women of Asphalt. We're excited to welcome you all to our second Conversations to Lead and Inspire webinar for 2022. Several people have registered today and we're really excited. We've got a great session for you. We're going to hear from Kim McDonald and Coralie Fox on the newest frontier in workplace safety, how psychological health and safety can change your work life. And this is a great follow-up to our last Conversations to Lead and Inspire series by Cal Beyer and Vince Heffley on shining light on mental health and suicide prevention. We look forward to hearing what all Kim and Coralie have to share with us today. And before we turn it over to our speakers, we just want to encourage any and all of you who may not be members of Women of Asphalt to please go to our website, womenofasphalt.org, where you can learn more about how to join. And again, our membership is free. And you can also follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Kim and Coralie and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Hello, everyone. I encourage and invite you to turn on your cameras if you can and you're comfortable doing that. It does give us the sense that we're all in the room together. When I am sharing the screen, you won't be able to see us in all of our tiles all over the screen, but you'll see them on to the right, and you can scroll through and see who else is there, people you may know. People you may get to know when we go into the breakout room, which will be great. And that breakout room opportunity is a good chance to talk about the topic, but also to meet some of your peers across the country. We're excited to be here. And I just want to get started and kick us off with, thank you, Ashley, for that. I'm just taking this down in the corner. I'm just getting everybody's beautiful faces down below for me so that I can see everything. I wanted to start our session off with we do this every time for us in our company, which is the land acknowledgement. And we would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that we live and work in Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people here in Nova Scotia. And this territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship of 1725. We send our respects to their leaders and community members, past and present, and acknowledge that we are all treaty people. So for us, you've probably read a little bit about me in the promo piece that the Women of Asphalt sent out. My name is Kim McDonald, and I'm a workplace trainer in psychological health and safety, in conscious leadership, culture change, and also mental health at work. And I also coach and advise leaders and their teams in how to build psychologically safe and healthy cultures. Coralie, if you want to bring yourself on and introduce yourself.
You bet. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. I've had past lives in the software industry, as well as teaching yoga and meditation. And now I'm a coach and business consultant. So thank you so much for inviting me today. It's great to be here.
Thanks for that. So I want to start with this image that you may have seen all over Facebook. And I just thought this was a beautiful representation of the work that the Women of Asphalt do every day. And I am positive that it's not concrete, that she's fixing asphalt. And she's fixing the world with her allies, because from an inclusive perspective, the table's really big, that we need all of us at work to create psychologically healthy and safe workplaces. And look at that hair part. Who doesn't want to do that? I do. I might even have to do that at some point in the next few weeks, now that she's inspired me like that. Today, we're going to talk about healthy workplaces and people are central to psychologically safe and healthy workplaces. We're going to talk about some of the topics, some of the definitions, and what are some of the important pieces. And then we're going to follow up at the end with some changes that you can make, some things that are really important for you to start noticing, observing, and paying attention to, so that whether or not you create a strategy in your workplace, you can also do little changes that will actually create psychologically healthy and safe workplaces, regardless of what your role is. So we're going to start, and Coralie is going to start us off by helping bring us into presence and bring us in and get our nervous systems all regulated, which I need to do every day. And that's why I partner with Coralie in this. So I'm going to turn it over to her now.
All right, thanks. We are going to talk a few times today about how we can use mindfulness to regulate our nervous system and to help us manage stress. So mindfulness is a science-based set of techniques, and it's really about awareness. So I don't know if you're anything like me, but while our thoughts and our minds can be really powerful things, they can also drive us crazy, right? Is anyone an overthinker? We do our best work at 3 a.m. So we want to keep in mind that there's also lots of intelligence in our body. I might get a gut feeling about someone, or I might all of a sudden feel a huge connection with someone even before when I've only just met them and haven't even really thought about it. So we want to be open to that intelligence in our body. So why don't we do a little grounding exercise just to help get us into our bodies so that we can make all that intelligence available to us. So start by closing your eyes. And just allow yourself to shake off whatever you were doing before and just come into the present moment. So let's start by noticing how you're sitting. See if there's something you can be more intentional about. Maybe you bring your back a little straighter, your feet against the floor. And then take a couple of deep breaths. And as you do that, just notice where you're holding any stress or tension in your body and let it go. Maybe you can relax your jaw a little bit, let your shoulders relax away from your ears. Maybe you're holding on to some tension in your belly or in your legs. Just let it go, let it relax. And then bring your attention to your feet and really feel them grounding into the floor. So you're really supported here. And notice what parts of the back of your body you can feel against your chair. Notice how that chair is almost rising up to support you. And then see if you can settle in even more, maybe get a little bit more melty against the chair that you're sitting on. And then just feel your inner world here, feel the interior of your body, and just give yourself some gratitude for all the things that your body does for you as you're coming into presence. All right, and then you can open your eyes anytime. Thank you for doing that practice with me. Back to you, Kim.
Thanks, Carly. So we're going to talk about change for the next 50 minutes or so. And with workplace change, even positive change, there is going to be resistance because not everyone is going to be happy. And particularly with psychologically safe practices and psychologically healthy practices, which there are many things that we do already that are in those baskets. However, there are things that we do that we don't even realize the impact of some of those things, and things that we've learned a long time ago because of our own background, work experiences, all those things, and we bring them into work every day. And so there may be some shifts and conversations of shift that will be required to bring you further along into a workplace that's inclusive and high trust. And because of that, there will always be some resistance. And we need to ensure that the entire table is psychologically safe, even those people who are taking a little bit of time and struggling with change. Because we all are different people on the sort of the innovation of change diagram. Some of us are early adopters in some parts of our life, and some of us are in the big majority, or that we're slower to adopt change. So we all have variations in our life, and we need to be respectful of that and bring that along. And then the opportunity is to continue to make positive change and respect that there's going to be resistance in it. So why we're talking about this today, certainly today's conditions, we've gone through the pandemic, but even before that, we had a lot of data that was telling us about what the state of the workplace is like and what our experiences are. And even if you particularly haven't had a challenging experience over the last 5 or 10 years, many people have, and the data does support that. But the pandemic has really shone a light, I think, on that employees' needs are changing. And that's not even generationally. If you're a Generation X or Z or a boomer or anywhere in there, the needs for workers and workplaces have changed. And so organizations, they are now in the midst of some change themselves, thinking about the practices that they've always had in place and how can they adopt and become more innovative and more flexible to do that. And a statistic I have here is last year, so the last 12 months, 47.8 million US workers quit their jobs in 2021. And that number is actually for them voluntarily. This does not include people who were let go or laid off. Those are people who voluntarily left their job for another job. And so we know that a lot of the research right now is in 2019, they left for money. That's not to say we all don't leave for money. However, right now it's about flexibility. It's about autonomy and flexibility at work. And so that particular characteristic, which is actually embedded in psychologically healthy and safe workplaces, is one of the characteristics that organizations are really starting to think about and really need to think about as we go down this. We also have some strong market drivers. So we have retention, we have trying to attract new workers, creating cultures that are attractive to them, and it's highly competitive, as all businesses are in that same state. So we have all of these conditions right now, and over the last 5 years, they have been evolving, and now we're in this place. And so old ways won't necessarily open new doors, but the good thing is to keep the good, all of those good unifying traditions in our workplaces, and then create room for some of the new things and the new ways of thinking. I'd love for you to drop in the chat, what is the biggest stressor or biggest challenge you've been having in your work, or that you've heard about, or your colleagues or peers have been having? What is the biggest challenge right now in your workplaces? And I also encourage you as we go through this to, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat as well, because Corley's going to grab those for us and we'll have some time at the end. And also let us know where you're calling in from. That would be lovely to see. Deadlines, ongoing deadlines, staffing, finding new hires. Is there, I can take a look at that. I'm curious if moms had to quit due to a home. Yes, Deborah, that's a good question. Very, very good question. Definitely, we know that the pandemic has been harder on working moms and women in particular. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that flexibility shift has been there might be a gender sort of factor in that. Biggest stress is employee drama. Okay. Deborah, oh, hi, Deborah. Implementing change. Denver, oh, great. Charlotte, confidence. Oh, these are Texas. We've got Washington, Texas, Lake Erie, very cool. So implementing change, I'm seeing a lot, and that is absolutely one of the biggest stressors. And I say because we see and we know that we struggle with change. Let me just scroll down there. There we go. Well, the good news in all that, even though the change can be a stressor, we are wired for work. So work is special. It actually fulfills psychologically healthy and safe and really good workplace cultures, fulfill almost all of our needs way beyond a paycheck. So all of the things that we have to be thriving human beings, work can actually provide that, up into including joy. Now, in many workplaces, there are a lot of strategies to actually unlock joy, and there's a lot of really good research around that that we can put in place to do that as you go through some changes. But you really can't access joy unless you are far on the spectrum of a psychologically healthy and safe work environment. Because if you are on the struggling side or you have some struggles, it's very difficult for employees to experience joy in that environment. But it can give us all of these things. So connection, belonging, thriving, respect, meaning, an incredible way to contribute to our workplaces, all of those things. And here, I think you'll all agree that this little person probably needs some shoes. And it's good that we don't do that anymore for all of us in Canada, the US, and all over the world. So the evolution of health and safety has gone this way. And it's been 255 plus years. And so starting with physical, then chemical, then biological, ergonomic, and now we're in psychological. And all of that change has happened. If you look at some of the history, and some of you are probably in health and safety and have a really deep, rich understanding of the history of health and safety in workplaces, you will see that a lot of factors were in place. So there was innovation, there was tragedy, there were big events, there were leadership in trade unions and leadership in business, and all of those things together have helped us progress. And there's always room for courage and those people who are taking a leap of faith and going beyond legal minimums. And that's where we are with psychological health and safety. It is beyond a legal minimum. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So I mentioned this in the promo too, that we probably are all familiar with psychological safety at a personal level. We probably have experienced it. We may not have been able to put that word, psychological or safety, to the experience, but it probably came up in a feeling, and it could have been feelings of trust, security on the positive side, respect, belonging, or on the difficult side, we may have been feeling unsettled, a little disquiet, unease, anxiety. Something was popping up in our thinking when we were around someone that was like, can I speak up? Can I trust this person? Those are feelings of psychological safety and psychological healthy environment. And so trust your instincts is very, very important, but also question your instincts, because curiosity will help you remain a little more open, because our brains are always looking for threat, constant threat, and trying to assess what kind of response and reaction should we have. And then if we have experienced some of these things earlier in life, we actually form behavioral patterns. We can change those, but we have some thinking and emotional responses to different situations that are not so much about the particular situation, but they are helping us, or they're giving us some signal that there may be something here for us to be considering more fully. Whoops, let me get past that. So it's not so much that we have a physical fear of this tiger, this beautiful tiger. So we aren't in this situation where we're going tiger, tiger anymore. But what we are assessing is we're assessing for our safety. And we're asking ourselves these questions. Is it safe to think differently, to learn to make mistakes, and to actually tell people about them? Is it safe to contribute, challenge the status quo, speak differently, speak out, trust differently, act differently, be vulnerable, tell someone the truth? But to be able to do all that without any retaliation or any loss inside the workplace or any repercussions, that's what psychological safety asks at work. And we know that for many people, depending on people's backgrounds, sometimes that isn't the case. To be able to be yourself, to be different, to be able to express yourself in a way and still be included and feel safe. So we've had a ton of research on workplace psychological safety, but also on workplace behavior. And now the opportunity just past, I think, the pandemic is to really take that and really apply it and make some changes, because we have workforces and employees coming in that are looking for something different. So the opportunity is to connect all these dots. So the research over the last 5-10 years in the 1990s, when I think it was in the 1960s when psychological safety was first sort of envisioned, but certainly in the last 10 years, there's been more research on it. And in the last 5, there's a huge study that Google has done, and it was the Aristotle Project. And they looked at 180 teams across 24 countries, I think it was, to try to figure out what is the secret sauce, the secret ingredient for high performing teams. And in the end, they did all of the magic that you would need to be able to figure that out. And it was psychological safety, because they were looking at every other feature in team dynamics, trying to figure that out. Was it leader skill in this area? What was it? They dissected the whole thing, and it came down to psychological safety, which really psychological health and safety and trust go hand in hand. And then all of these other things that you see on the screen, all of those are connected. So it's really an opportunity to connect those dots depending on the context of the organization, because that is key. Your organization is different than every other organization. So you have to take the context in hand and then figure out how to apply this. But all of those things are available to any business. Inclusion, motivation, productivity, performance has all been sort of identified as psychological safety. If you have a the research on the business for those who are interested in the business numbers. Profitability and performance for psychologically safe businesses, 15% more revenue is available to organizations that really focus and prioritize psychological health and safety in their workplaces. So but psychological health and safety isn't an end in itself, it's actually a means to an end. The end goal are all of these things. So they might be business impacts that you're trying to drive, or they're human impacts that you're trying to drive. And the first one is mental health, plus all of these other things. And all these things on the left are outcomes for a psychologically healthy and safe work environment. And the things on the right are some of the business outcomes. And there's certainly that the business is very interested in the ownership, is very interested in these human impacts. But the good news is, from a business perspective, that these are also driven by a psychologically safe and a work environment. And as I mentioned, joy. I keep raising joy because joy is the ultimate human condition, because it's a complex emotion. It's different than happiness, but this isn't stress literacy or emotional literacy, is it, Corley? So I won't go down that bunny hole. I've just stopped myself, Ashley. I was just ready to just talk about literacy for the next half hour. No, I'm just all right. So psychological health and safety, I'm going to get into some definitions now. We did a little bit of a precursor, but its purpose, it's a means to an end for all of those good things that you saw that are possible within a workplace. But it's really to identify and establish mental health as a recognized and permanent value within organizations. So it's to take it where many organizations are having good conversations now and talking about it and trying to put mental health strategies or mental health training in place. Psychological health and safety actually embeds this as an important, another strategic piece in the business. And so gives it it elevates it to the same status as you would quality in your business. That is the idea, is actually giving it an elevated status, because you are interested in quality, you're interested in these other business outcomes. So it's a means to an end. And there are a lot of good strategies to be able to get you there. And your context, you're probably doing all kinds of really good things already. Sometimes it's really confirming those and maybe just dialing them up a little. So why now? I mentioned some things about the statistics, and not everyone's excited about statistics and numbers, but for mental health, and you had heard, if you had come on to the call with Cal and Vince, certainly some of the statistics that they were sharing are really, really concerning and troubling. And many of them are both in the US, Canada, Australia, UK, which are kind of the countries that I'm particularly interested in right now, watching them and the developments in psychological safety and also mental health at work. So here are some of our numbers. So 1 in 4 working people experience a major mental health disorder each year, and that's in the United States and in Canada. 1 in 3 Americans suffer from clinical depression. 1 in 2, and in 2019, it was actually 1 in 4. And so that number has shifted since 2019 to 2022, where the negative impacts of stress in working Americans. So 84% feel stress every week. And stress is, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, about what stress is, and then also what stressors are, which are 2 separate things. But the understanding that it may not be you, that you may be functioning really, really well in terms of your mental health and your stress, but these are the people we work with. So these are the numbers of the people around us. And from a financial perspective, $1 trillion, I think it's now my favorite number. It's practically Corley and I's like average salary between us each year, probably yours as well. But it's a huge number. It's a huge number. So in the United States, in lost productivity. So from an organizational perspective, this is a really compelling time and a compelling sort of cycling all of that from a mental health perspective. And mental health is the single largest cause of disability. And that is going to be, it's not getting any better. In fact, the numbers are getting worse. Stress and stressors. Stress is, we all need stress. In fact, there is something called the Goldilocks effect, which I'm just sharing this. I don't know if any of our allies are here today. However, when you look at the Goldilocks curve, they do place things in gender. So where women typically fall on the Goldilocks curve in our ability to withstand stress, and where males fall on it. And I'm just saying this here within the dome, but I know if we have some allies here, they'll be very happy that this is the case as well. And it's probably shows up in their life, that women actually have a greater capacity to withstand stress and still cope and manage really, really well. And our male colleagues are a little bit further down the line. So there's something called challenge stress. So it actually is motivating and it gets us going. And we need stress in our lives. It's a naturally occurring factor in our lives, and our bodies are built to deal with it. However, it is cumulative. So not processing it and managing some of the factors that are stressors is part of that. It's part of the planning, the strategy from a workplace is to look at both of those things. And the World Health Organization has said that stress is an epidemic. And that is globally across the world. And when Vince and Cal were here, they talked definitely about suicide and suicide in the industry. It is the second highest cause of death among men under the age of 45. And we know in this industry that men are, I think it's 3 times as many men either attempt to die by suicide or are successful to die by suicide than women. However, suicide is a very difficult conversation to have in workplaces, but incredibly important one. These are our numbers: 47,000 died by suicide in the United States last year, and 4,600 in Canada. I put these in these numbers. If you think of an Airbus 330 or a Boeing 737, let's say there are 400 people. So that is 11 airplanes every month crashing on American soil, and every month and never stopping. And in Canada, it's 1 airplane every month crashing on Canadian soil, everyone perishing and never stopping. Those are the suicide numbers. Imagine if all of those 11 airplanes kept crashing on soil, how we would actually together collectively get together and have more conversations around this. But because they are individual, and we know these numbers are actually low, because it's only, the United States is really good at reporting both trauma and suicide numbers. Canada, we suck. We suck at it, but we're getting a little bit better. But there's really, really good data that organizationally you collect across the country. And so having good data is part of having a good conversation around it. We also know that unmanaged stress and trauma lead to all of those top mental illnesses that I'm sure you've heard about and you talk about, or you may be experiencing, or your family members are experiencing, which are depression, anxiety, addictive behaviors, and physical illness. And so that is the importance of stress and stressor conversations in workplaces. Here's a number that even if it's not me or you or the person sitting next to you, this is also us and the people we work with. So this study was by the Boston University, and I think it was 2018. So all of us, or in the United States, 82.7, I don't know if you can see that statistic on the map, but 82.7% of Americans will have 4 diagnosable level traumas in a lifetime. And all of our abilities to be able to process those, to be able to cope and thrive and live well, or to have a chronic mental health issue and still thrive, which you can. If you have a mental illness, you can still thrive with all of the supports you need in place. But this is a huge number when we think about it. Sometimes we think about PTSD and other things like that in those kind of conversations, but 4 diagnosable level traumas in a lifetime. And that's also sort of a call for us to be thinking more about mental health and the level and depth of it in our communities. But the good news, so that was very sobering, I know, but the good news are that organizations, whether the issues there are issues inside the organization or not, organizations have a huge influence. in our lives and a huge positive influence in our lives. And if we connect the dots and we make some targeted changes, one target change or some or many, depending on the organization, the outcomes will be better. Now, this is from an OH&S, so occupational health and safety. All of us, whether it's on the physical safety side or our psychological safety side, we are all responsible for our own individual health and our well-being, whether we're in the workplace or outside the workplace. That is part of our shared responsibility, that it's part of our job to make sure that we are healthy and show up well and try to stay well. An employer also has a duty. Certainly lots of conversations, and we've had it for 60 years on the physical side, but on the psychological side. So an employer's duty is to provide a safe and harassment-free workplace. But we all know that in all workplaces, not all the time, but depending, and maybe for a period of time, because some dynamics have happened, that there are healthy and unhealthy behaviors that can take place in a workplace. And so it's a spectrum of behavior. So if we think about sort of on the far left, that is sort of psychologically unsafe into violent and very unsafe behaviors. We also have behaviors that just piss us off and are irritating, they agitate us, or those kinds of things can happen in workplaces, but they don't meet the standard for harm. So we have to know that there's a whole spectrum here. And then there are legal minimums that employers are required to ensure for this harassment and a safe and harassment-free workplace. And then on the far right, when we're thinking about, okay, beyond a legal minimum, if we're innovators and we're trying to make changes, positive changes beyond a legal minimum, what can we do? Well, that's where human needs to thrive. So all of those positive things that we saw on that list, those are the things that are accessible when you are putting conditions in place and managing the stressors so that humans can thrive in their workplaces, show up well, be motivated, engaged, support each other, all of those really positive behaviors. And I say it's that we all have this shared responsibility, but I also say from a psychological health and safety perspective that organizations and organizational leaders have 110%. In any part of your life, you never have to take more than 100% responsibility for this particular, and this is, I know it's just a joke, but I say that organizations, you have 110 because you have more power and you have more capacity to make the changes happen. So leaders, both leaders, managers, middle managers are incredibly important in psychological health and safety because that's where many employees get all of their information. But the organization has a leadership role. But we share in creating the conditions, and that's because I want to bring thermodynamics in here. And that's mostly because I got a 55 in physics in grade 12 and never took another class. So that's why I went into marketing, communications, and then behavioral science. People in organizations are open systems. And the reason that's important is because of this responsibility, that we all have this shared responsibility. And this is the nature of an open system. So any biological organism is an open system. And so is an organization itself. It's an open system. And an open system where the external world has influence on the system has, you and I have influence on our external world, and the system changes what's around it, and we are changed. That's the nature of understanding why it's important to understand that we're open systems. And that's why that shared responsibility is important. And the learning and training and development of everyone within the organization is important because of that shared responsibility and the fact that we have influence. So when you apply stress, and I use this undercarriage of a bridge, I'm sure there are more technical words for that. So if you applied stress to a system that's supported, and this is just a hypothetical question, or you apply stress to a system that is not supported, you can guess which one can withstand and have greater resilience. And within the organization, we're talking about putting protective factors in place, managing hazards and risk, but also protective factors so that that particular system, people and the organization are supported and can withstand some of those other conditions from the external world that are happening. And I think, is this over to you, Corley?
Yes, let's talk
All
some
right.
more about the definitions of psychological safety. So here's an example of a low safety situation. So say I'm on a team and we're considering a solution to one of our problems, and I may not speak up. I might self-censor myself if I'm in a situation where I feel like there might be retaliation, or someone's going to not see me as a team player, or my supervisor is going to frown at me. And you think about the impact to the business, if we're all a bunch of yes people, that's no good for figuring out how we're going to move forward. In a high safety environment on the other end of the spectrum, let's say, again, give an example, something in my personal life goes sideways and I say to my team members, oh man, I got to go deal with this. And they say, no problem, we've got your back, we'll take care of it, we'll make sure the work gets done. That's what's called discretionary efforts, when they're going to have my back and I'm going to do the same for them for no monetary, exchange of money. It's just because we're a great team, we have trust, and we take care of each other. So that's a super high safety kind of example of an organization. And again, think of how great that is for the business. If even though we have stressors, the work is going to go forward. So just digging a little deeper into negative behaviors. So think about what it's like when you're in a workplace where you're ignored or excluded, or you're not respected, or there's criticism, people being unhelpful, dismissive, all of that. What's the impact on us? Of course, we're going to start to shut down. We actually have decreased cognitive function in a situation like that. So we can't come up with solutions to problems. We're not going to collaborate. We're not going to feel engaged. We're definitely not going to challenge the status quo. So what that means for us personally and our basic needs, we're not going to feel respected. We're going to have low self-esteem. There's going to be lack of connection and belonging. And then when we try to cope with it, we might come up with survival strategies that aren't very positive. We're going to be disengaged and we're going to have very low motivation. So then let's look at the other end of the spectrum, a healthy environment. So if I'm feeling included and I'm supported, I'm going to cooperate. I'm going to experience personal growth. Hopefully I've got leaders there. If it is a positive organization, they're setting clear expectations. They're cutting down on uncertainty. I feel recognition and appreciation. And so what that means for me is I'm more energized. I'm more productive. I'm motivated. I'm ready to take innovation and add ideas, and I will question the status quo. I'll raise my hand in the meeting and stick my neck out. And so what that means for us personally is there's a reduction in stress. And when we do have stressors, which of course we always will if we're being challenged and growing, we have trust and security. So we're able to cope with them. We can access the joy that Kim talks about. And of course, it's great for the business. So I'm succeeding, my team is succeeding, and my company is succeeding.
Was it back to me?
Back to you, Kim.
I was just engaged there. I thought, wow, that's good. Thank you. So here's a little digging a little bit deeper into the definition. And so these are some of the formal definitions so in Canada created in 2013 a voluntary standard based on an incredible amount of research and engagement with mental health commissions and mental health associations, as well as academics. And these particular definitions, and when we talk about psychological health and safety, those two things, it's important if you're starting to have those conversations inside is to distinguish them, because they are two separate pieces to the whole. And we want to be accurate about the action you might be taking to make sure it's actually hitting the objective you want. So the more we can take these apart and understand them a little more deeply, the more accurate we can be with this particular action. This is actually around creating safety. This is actually, we have already achieved safety. Now we're going into motivation, engagement, innovation, creativity, all of those kinds of things. So that's why we separate them, and that's why there are two pieces to one particular phrasing in terms of this means to an end for all the good things that we talked about for workplaces. So a psychologically safe workplace is a workplace where every reasonable effort is made to prevent harm to mental health through negligence, reckless or deliberate mentally injurious conduct. Yes, a lawyer must have written that. That sounds like absolutely like a lawyer. I love lawyers. Lawyers are my favorites. They're I absolutely love them. I'm always sitting beside lawyers. I say that I'm lawyer adjacent. I know this much because I do part of our psychological safety in the law. We teach that as well. So I have a pretty good understanding of it. Every jurisdiction is different. So how do we do that? So that is what is a psychologically safe workplace, and how we do that is to manage the risks, identify the risks, learn to recognize the risks, get to know the risks, and then figure out how to manage them, and then identify those hazards to mental health and to psychological health, and then take corrective action and take as accurate corrective action as you can to ensure that whatever was the challenge there, you can address it and mitigate it. Psychologically healthy workplace, which is on that spectrum I showed you, so the safe, unsafe, sort of legal minimums, and then to a healthy place. A workplace where every reasonable effort is made to promote awareness, education, and action around mental and emotional health of employees at work. So there's work to ensure that there is safety, and there's work to ensure that you can go further than that, and you can actually start to really impact performance and all of those high performance goals that your workplace may have. And how do you do that? You promote understanding and support for some of those positive behaviors, the climate and the culture. And managing and creating culture and changing and shifting culture is not easy. However, it can be done and it's possible. And it does start with the leadership, with their commitment to do that. So this is what psychological health and safety is not. It's not the organization and the manager becoming a therapist or a counselor and taking care of all of our mental health needs. It's also not sort of this notion of, which you've probably heard about, which is positivity, unhealthy positivity. Oh, it's all good. It's all, let's just move on and pretend that everything's good. I think those statements like no bad vibes here, that kind of stuff, that can be motivating for many of us. And it also can be a little bit problematic because that doesn't leave room for human struggle. That doesn't leave room for me telling the truth or you telling the truth to a supervisor that, it's really hard today. I'm finding this hard. And then your supervisor working with you to figure that out with you, and absolutely not having a repercussion or a judgment or any of those things, just dealing with it in the moment in the most accurate way that you can. And it's also not the absence of tough calls and decisions or the absence of performance goals, feedback, and management. It is all of the things that we talked about, and this is sort of the reassurance for workplaces that it isn't, what some people do confuse the word psychological health and safety with mental health, with, emotional health and all those kinds of things. That it's important to actually up our emotional literacy, because there's no reason for many of us to have ever learned many stress literacy and emotional literacy understandings unless we purposefully made that commitment to ourselves, or we were in an environment where we did that. I mean, it's certainly not something that was taught in school. And we need to be able to better understand our own emotional makeup so that we can then show up really well for work. But the workplace is there to support us, not to completely take over all of our mental health needs. So I want to chat a little bit about psychological safety in the law and the workplace, though every jurisdiction, whether you're in Canada, the US, the UK, or Australia, we all have our different jurisdictions. Ours are provinces, yours are states. Australia, it's states. The UK has counties, I think. But everybody has their own jurisdiction, and we all have our own legal minimums. And they set minimums. Typically, we started with all those minimums on the far left, so violence in the workplace. And we've moved to policies around workplace, respectful workplaces, and those kinds of things, which are all good protective factors for psychological health and safety. And there has been movement along that path that other jurisdictions have actually started to move even faster. But the law sets the minimums that an organization cannot fall below. And that's whether it's physical health or psychological health. And every jurisdiction, it would you would be needing to look at the law within that jurisdiction and see what the legal framework is. I know in the US, California has some legislation around mental health in the workplace. And I think that might be the leader in the US, but you can't completely quote me on that. It was just something in the last few months that I've been doing some work trying to explore a little bit. But you would have to go into your state laws unless you are federally regulated. And then the Federal Public Service for the US does have much more supports in place if you're in the federal public service for psychological safety at work. But the law provides these minimums, and then it provides mechanisms to respond when minimums are not met. So for example, these are that spectrum, which is harassment, violence, bullying. And for many jurisdictions, there are protected characteristics around human rights. So it may be that you're protected by virtue of your gender, your race, your sexual orientation. So those human rights legislation can also apply in a jurisdiction. So that is a protective factor for whatever jurisdiction you're in. But there's always a place at the forefront for innovators and those who are going above and beyond whatever is minimally required by their legislative framework. So for psychological health and safety, Australia's beaten us. It's the bottom line. They are. So we had done some things in Canada in terms of we have a voluntary standard with a lot of really good information. And we have now in the world an ISO standard for psychological health and safety. Australia has actually moved to legislation, and now they're actually in regulations and compliance. So they announced this in February 2022. So the law for psychological health and safety is evolving. And it's something for organizations to also be conscious of, because if there is a global evolution of this, then for all of us in every company, in every organization around the world, being more competitive will become another factor in consideration for competitiveness. And the regulations, they're going to be looking at these for about a year. I think it's July of 2023. Then they're doing this consultation for a year. Anybody who's in psychological health and safety, me included, is watching it really carefully and trying to understand how they're going to do that. But they have, they're looking for compliance. You have to have a psychological health and safety strategy in place. You have to have all of these things in place, and you have to report incidents. So in the same way that we would have done it for incidents and hazard assessment for physical occupational health and safety, this is absolutely around psychological health and safety. And so there will be financial penalties attached to those kinds of things as well. And this is the evolving nature of law in different jurisdictions. So I wanted to make sure now every jurisdiction has their legislative framework. They'll have acts, then the legislation, then you'll have regulations. However, it is an evolving area of law. So I mentioned about the standards. So right now, nowhere in the world is it legislated, except for Australia moving towards that. However, in Canada, we have a couple of places that are moving quicker as well. And Ontario and British Columbia in Canada are moving quite quickly. And so these are the voluntary standards. So Canada has a voluntary standard with 13 factors. And these are the factors that for workplaces can take a look at their own workplace and their own context and decide which of these make the most sense for us to be having conversations around or moving towards, or saying, oh yes, we do this really, really well. And so, and then do we just need to remind people, nudge people, dial it up, have more conversations around it, train some of our leaders in leading psychologically healthy and safe workplaces and the culture, all of those things. So there's a lot of resources available to you. And then the ISO standard also in the same way, you can look to the global standard, but your organizational context is very, very important because there's an enormous number of resources available. And it can get, even for the biggest organizations, it can get overwhelming. And you really want to figure out what is the highest and best action that we can take. And it's not to presuppose that there is difficulty within the organization. It is, culture is always a moving part of the world inside an organization, and you want to be able to continuously improve it. And this is the means to the end to do that. So this one, I don't want your eyes to glaze over with this particular slide, which is like all the words in the world, isn't it, Corley? I think I collected all the words, put them in a basket, and then it was kind of like bingo. If you are from Nova Scotia, and bingo is very, very big in rural Nova Scotia. So we could play bingo with all of these words. However, the takeaway I'd like you to bring with you as you leave when we finish up the session is that you can look at your workplace from a whole bunch of different angles. You can, at the far left there, you can say, okay, well, we know that these are things that are important to us, like trust, like respect, like inclusion. What can we do to look at some of the issues in psychological health and safety and the factors, whether it's a common stressor, whether we know it, we observe it, or we want to start observing it, or just paying more attention to it. So it's really connecting the dots through here. And then what is the action management can take? For many risks, just like physical risks, there may be physical risks that you say, okay, we have to accept that risk and we need to mitigate it. So it's not that you can always eliminate risk. You need to say, okay, let's explore it and understand it. Let's either eliminate it, which would be ideal. However, you can also accept, reduce, put a protective factor in place to kind of mitigate it. Those are the actions that are possible when you figure out, okay, what are the business standards or the issues or the ideals for a culture that you want to create on the left? What are some of the psychosocial factors and where are they showing up? What is the action we can take? And then what are some of the strategies, sort of categories of strategies we can use? You could nudge positive behavior. You can have a policy that's like a respectful workplace policy. You can have training and learning and development. You can do coaching to help people understand. You can have conversations, formal conversations and informal conversations. You can embed it inside operational because it really needs to be business as usual. So safety is business as usual in the same way occupational health and safety on the physical side. You already have the thinking and some of the processes and standards around physical safety. You can apply these to psychological health and safety. And all of the same kinds of things show up. You look at your processes, your policies, your behaviors. There's probably training and engagement of teams that need to be involved, identifying the risks or the ideals that you're trying to reach, as well as the hazards, investigate and understand and learn from it, put some actions in place, and then do follow-up. But the best thing you can do is align it with mental health strategies, as well as some of the things you're doing with continuous improvement. So you really want to make this is not more work, this is work differently. And so you can let go some of the things. For example, I think a couple of people said that, people struggling with change and also drama at work. Well, if you get some of these things in place, all of that attention and energy that we all need to do with conflict and interactions and work with each other, you can actually be assured that some of that will be reduced. So you actually have more bandwidth. So it would be a different way. This isn't more work, this is work differently. And then integrate the best things that are the highest and best use for you, for your context. That the safety system, I say it is a system, a management system for safety, and it has an additional element. So it's also a system that prioritizes the emotional and behavioral sides of things. So it's a little different than if Ashley, you left a bucket in the hall and, and we had to do a risk assessment and you write those kinds of incidents up. You aren't really attached to that bucket. You probably just did it and it was not a good thing. It's a safety hazard. When we're talking about this, we're talking about conditions and behaviors. And so raising the emotional intelligence on some of those conversations for teams that are working on this is very important, because you are going to be having conversations about different standards and standards of behavior that you want to put in place to be able to ensure there might be you're going to integrate it into HR, which is around some learning and development. You want to make sure that you're creating any conversation around corrective behavior is psychologically safe itself. So there are some additional things to be thinking about. And the bottom line for this is sort of woven into a psychologically healthy and safe work environment, which is the greatest thing, which is a caring work culture. So it's a work culture that cares and a work culture that will learn. And those two things, of all the other things, are really sort of that's where I think if you can give some attention and thought to how do we actually, are we living that now? What do we need to do to adjust to get closer to a learning environment and also to a caring environment? Because this, for any manager, this is the statement for any manager that's talking to someone. This is the key message, which is talking to someone who is in struggle, which is, what do you need right now so that you can bring your best to the job and I can help you be successful? That is the purpose. That's the statement, because it is putting whatever supports are in place to be able to make anybody show up well at work and not leave work more stressed than they were or go home sick. So it's really that shared agreement that the manager and the person are on the same path, that your success is my job. I have no other job as a middle manager than to ensure that you have all the tools you need to do your work. And that includes supports to ensure that your well-being is taken care of as well. And I distinguish here these two definitions, one of empathy and one of caring, because there's a lot of conversation about empathetic leadership and empathetic cultures. I would lean toward a caring culture before I'd go to an empathetic culture. In some of our training, when we're talking about leading psychological health and safety, curiosity is, for anybody that you may not know someone like this. My partner is this. Empathy is an interesting piece of many people's brains. Not a lot of people really, many of us are very empathetic, but there are some people who care, but they are not what you would say highly empathetic, because they don't notice and observe things, or they're not attaching or making connecting the dots all the time. But you can actually use curiosity and skills and competency in curiosity that will get you to the same place. So that, some of the concern is about, emotional literacy and those kinds of things, and empathy. Curiosity, asking good questions, become a collector of questions, not answers at work, but wonder why that happened. Wonder why that happened. And then that happened. And then that happened. But the more curious you can be, the more caring a culture you can build. And caring actually has action associated, where empathy is about trying to understand and experience what someone else is experiencing. And because we have brains that we get really settled in our rightness. So as soon as we think we know the answer, our brain shuts down and we're not curious anymore. We then can sometimes circumvent our assumption, and we get into assumptions. So if you have a caring culture, you have active listening, you have questioning, trying to do reflective listening, all of those kinds of things, and it's associated with action. So it actually goes beyond empathy and goes into action. And that's where psychologically healthy and safe work environments really need to sit, where there is actually action and behavior to support it. And you're important, so you have influence at work, regardless of your role, whether if you're a manager or supervisor, amazing, and everyone else, because every day this is what you do. You communicate what is valued, who is valued, what kinds of behaviors are accepted here, which are not accepted, who's included and how, and who has permission to challenge the status quo. And we do that sometimes unconsciously at work. And we do that in our home lives unconsciously as well. But you're always communicating that. And you're doing it sometimes intentionally, sometimes with purpose, and sometimes it's just happening. And so it's so important that we're co-creating the conditions together in a workplace as a team. So for any of you who have been working on mental health strategies, for example, in your workplaces, that is incredibly important. that work is different than psychological health and safety. So these are two companion areas of focus. One is around the well-being of the individual, and the other one is talking and thinking about the organization and all of the conditions and the environment in the organization. So if you are doing things that are mental health initiatives and education and training, that is not necessarily going to move the needle on psychological health and safety. It is going to be a protective factor, but it's not going to move the needle because they have different objectives and you're asking different questions. So a psychological health and safety strategy is targeting conditions, behavior, and all of the organizational experience that the employees have at work. We're looking at hazards, stressors, putting in place protective factors when you can't eliminate or mitigate in any other way a particular stressor or hazard. And we're talking about the workplace experience overall. That's not to say that you implement it across the entire organization. You could do it with a team, and you can do a pilot, you could do one initiative, but it's looking at the organization and the conditions in the organization. Whoops. A mental health strategy is always around the people and their well-being. So it's around education, shared understanding. It might be around education around suicide. It could be around stigma. It could be about people becoming more comfortable with mental illness and what that means and what it doesn't mean, and debunking myths. And it could be around mental health first aid or all of the other kinds of things that are available for education around mental health. And health promotion, self-care, like stress management sessions, all of those kinds of things are important for mental health and well-being. They aren't actions that are around psychological health and safety. I would characterize it as this is a protective factor. So the fact that you have a well-educated workforce and team, and you and I sitting together in whatever team we're in, we both have this really good understanding that is going to be able to put us in a better place to hopefully bring our best selves to work. So that's why it's a protective factor. It is not necessarily going to shift the condition and the behaviors. The other part of mental health strategy might be your EAP plan or supports, or the fact that some of the benefits might be around you can access financial advice if you're an employee, because that's a huge stressor in our lives, especially with costs rising and all of the things that we've been seeing with inflation over the last year. So those kinds of things are all part of a mental health strategy and helping with our well-being. And that together will create some protection for us being well at work. We are going to jump in to doing a practice, which is, I think you had received the breakout session. This is our image of a psychologically healthy and safe workplace. So, which is, you know, how happy is that? Everybody must love that. So we're going to, I'm going to invite you, our Pinay is going to put everybody in groups, and I want to encourage you to get in a group and have a conversation. You'll get a chance to meet other people from somewhere else across the nation, and hopefully your peers, and you'll be able to introduce yourself and get to know each other a little bit, make connections, and also answer some of the questions we have. And then we're going to come back together, and we're going to, I'm not going to ask for all the groups to share, but I will ask for someone, if anybody wants to come back and volunteer and share what you folks had talked about and what you learned and insights that you might have had. So these, as I understand it, and our Pinay, everyone will be able to see those questions, won't they? Even while they're in the work or the breakout group?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
they will. Yep.
So if anyone wants to take a screenshot of it too with their phone, you can absolutely do that. I do that with every single thing in my life as I go through the world. I have never gone into a Home Depot without my phone to take pictures of every different SKU that I need. So I take pictures for everything, but they'll also be available to you. And we can also, Coralie, we can also drop them in the chat too, if you want to grab them and drop them in the chat. So here are the questions. So here are the instructions for you. You're going to go into a group. Please introduce yourself. Let people know where you're from. And then take just a little read through this, and you'll see this is the scenario we're giving you, that a hazard has been identified, that there has been a decrease in courtesy and civility and respectful behavior over the last month. The team has identified that this is actually posing a risk. So that's the hazard, which is different than a risk. That's the hazard in the workplace. The risk is that some negative consequences could be the outcome of this if not addressed. So there might be a climate of negativity growing, and so then it will grow into norms. So then the norm of no one saying hello, good morning, or being respectful of other people's equipment or tools, those kinds of things can potentially start to grow. That's the risk and the fear. Morale might be affected because of the negativity that no one is courteous to each other anymore. There might be increased absenteeism if the climate gets to a point where it is quite negative. And it also, when you have respect and civility going out the window, it actually opens the team and the organization up to potentially bias that can lead to harassment or bullying or complaints. And so that's some of the risk. And then the questions are, what does respect or disrespect look and feel like for you at work? Or you don't have to use your own work. You could say, in my opinion, this is what respectful would look like. This is what respectful would sound like. But only think of observed behaviors, not so much what you feel, but what you would see and what you would hear as examples, and then just a few bullets for each of those. And is in the workplace this kind of behavior, is it obvious and direct or subtle? Just have a little conversation around that based on your experiences, and maybe in what ways, if it is subtle, what ways does that kind of behavior show up, where if there is a increase in negativity and a lack of civility and courtesy at work. And what other impact might this hazard have if not addressed? And what can be done to mitigate or get the organization back on track, or the team back on track, to eliminate or address this hazard? Does anyone have any questions? Just looking around to see. Anybody have a hand up? You can come off mute if you have a question. Any questions? All right. Arpine, if you put everybody into breakouts and enjoy your conversation, and we'll bring you back to the main group after you've had a chance to chat. See you when you get back. Arpine, how's everyone doing with joining? Does everybody have a group?
Not everyone has joined a group.
Okay. Arpine, if you want to jump into a group and to see how everyone's doing, sometimes it's good to just check. Let's check here just to make sure that there are no groups of one.
Okay.
Yeah, just scrolling down there.
Sure.
I think, oh, let me just I think room 4, Kathy Webster, is by herself. So you could put her in another group. They look good. I'm looking at time, Corley, for us.
Yes.
Just trying to think of which. Ooh, time just flies.
Well, the challenge is when you start talking about psychological health and safety, you know so much and you're so passionate.
I know. So here's what we'll do. I think we will go, let me get past this. I think, why don't we go right to, oh. Let's see if I can, I'm going to stop the share for a sec and check it out.
Mm-mm.
Oh, not too bad, actually. Not as bad as I thought.
It's not, but we can skip the just like me
Yep.
if you want to do that.
Okay. Breakout rooms closing in 7 seconds. Do you want me to extend it?
Nope, that's all
Okay.
right. Well, actually, yes, let's give them another minute.
Okay.
It went fast, didn't it?
Okay, let me do it. Well, Kim, I think everyone is back in the main room.
Oops. Let me just get myself. There we go. Let me just share. Oh, great. There we go. Oh, on the current slide. Sorry about that, folks. There we go. Good. So your conversation, I know it was very, very short. Does anyone want to come live and just share a little bit about the conversation they had? All right, I'm going to jump right in to, hopefully you got a sense of this is the framework for having a look at identifying a hazard and then figuring out some of the risks and then figuring out, okay, what is the level of risk here and what are the risks and what can we do to mitigate it? This is just a very tiny portion of just trying to get your head to think about what should I be observing at work? What should I be noticing? And so noticing all of those factors, civility and respect is one of the 13 factors. And so there is, so that particular factor is associated with obviously respect, boundaries, our feelings of inclusion at work, all of those kinds of things. Because civility and respect is fundamental to our self-identity, to be seen, to be appreciated, And it also has incredibly positive force in improving trust and cooperation and productivity at work. And it is an area where poor habits can form really easily. For example, a highly stressful, really big project you're working on, and everybody's very busy and very committed to that. But sometimes we stop saying hello to each other. We're tired, we're exhausted, all of those kinds of things. So it's something to be very mindful of. And curiosity, I say, is a protective factor, because just saying, have we stopped saying hello to each other? Did we stop? Like those kinds of things. Just try to be more observant and curious about why things are happening at work. And then you can start to have better conversations around them. So we're going to end with a few tips on what you can do yourself to show up well at work. Boundaries are really attached to respect, and we all have a different version and definition of what respectful looks like at work. But we also have standards that they are written standards in policy and things like respectful workplace policy, or they're unwritten agreements on how we will conduct ourselves. But the other piece of that is we all have very unique and specific boundaries because of our backgrounds, how we were brought up, what we understand to be important in our lives. These 5 boundary conversations with yourself to be able to define, what are my boundaries around this, around psychological health and safety. These ones really attach nicely to working on a positive, psychologically safe work environment. Obviously, physical boundaries, your personal space bubble is your own. Who you get to allow to physically get close to you or even touch you, that is yours and yours alone. Intellectual, and by intellectual, what I mean is you hold certain beliefs, feelings, opinions. They're your own and should not be dismissed. Emotional boundaries, your responses are real and yours. However someone else might feel about a particular response you have, yours are yours and real. And the boundary is part of respect for that and appreciating that. You are separate from other people's reactions, experiences. You don't have to take on another's burdens. And it includes things that people can say to you and what people could say about you. And conversations is incredibly important for psychological health and safety, because in the workplace generally, we all know that you define the kinds of things you're comfortable talking about and what people can talk to you about at work, and your time. Now, this one is a little bit different, obviously, because when we're at work, our time is not necessarily our own, but your time, and if you are doing things that are outside of what your job is, your time is your own. And you are setting your own priorities and trying to get your own work done. And so the respect and conversations you can have around boundaries at work, because that is where misunderstandings can happen. If I have a time boundary that I focus on my work first, and then I can have some discretionary time to be able to help someone else on something that they need to do. If I tell them not now or dismiss them in some way, there can be a misunderstanding around that. And yet having conversations around our boundaries at work are rarely held. But I encourage you to be explicit conversations around boundaries and what we all are trying to appreciate around each other. The more that we can just have conversations around them, because boundaries are important and we need to talk about these things more openly and frankly, and not lead them to assumptions and misunderstandings. And boundaries are a form of self-care and very important for creating well-being at work. So Corley's going to take us through something that is around the vagus nerve stimulation, which is one of my favorite mindfulness practices, and something that I hope for you. It's a great, all these strategies are really good to pick the ones that you really resonate with you, but that really help you to de-stress. And so some of these practices we're sharing with you are around the de-stressing component so that you can show up really well at work. Corley?
All right. So yeah, let's talk some more about the nervous system. So as Kim mentioned, you know, our nervous system is looking for tigers. It's keeping an eye out for us so that we can go into fight, flight, freeze. So the real where this really happens is our vagus nerve. It's the longest cranial nerve. It starts right at our the base of our brain and goes down into our gut and actually connects to all the organs and then communicates back and forth. So when you are so stressed out that you feel sick to your stomach, that's the vagus nerve doing that kind of work. So by stimulating that nerve, we can really de-stress and really move ourselves out of fight flight. So just some examples here, and you know, I encourage you to test drive any of these that look interesting. A deep breath is like the bridge between our mind and our body. So it brings us right back into our body and you know, allows us to move out of fight flight. Also, things like cold showers, cold water on our face. Some people do ice packs on their chest. Just brings you right out of your overthinking, anxious head right into your body. Other things to think about.
Corley, your sound, I'm not sure if other people, are you hearing that as well?
There's
I think your sound previously was very good.
of apps, there's lots of guided practical, but if it's still powerful. Sorry, what's that?
Oh, your
Can you guys hear me okay?
no, I'm having a struggle hearing you. So what I think I'll do, does everybody hear me all right? All right, I'm just going to jump in, Corley.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So yes, all of these are different ways and everybody has their own. Ice cold showers, if you also suffer from anxiety, ice cold showers, which I'm still trying to work up because I do have anxiety. So I'm still trying to work up to 20 seconds. It's very, very, for me, but it absolutely shifts anyone who has anxiety. Cold water on your face, very, very good. Jumping in a barrel of ice cold water in the wintertime out in your yard, fabulous. Haven't done it, just watched it on YouTube. Kind of terrifies me, but I think it is one that's going to de-stress, do all of this beautiful stuff to your vagus nerve, but also going to reduce your anxiety. So laughter, exercise, gargling water, humming and singing also has an impact on your vagus nerve. So hanging out with friends, acupuncture, all of these different things are available to you, and you can do them, you know, many of them everywhere and anywhere, and just understand that what you are activating is, as Corley said. And there's so much more. This research for the vagus nerve has actually only been really around for us, just for you and me as average humans trying to change workplaces in the last, you know, 10 years or so. So we have a lot of new things that we now have really good science that's backing them up and showing us that there are ways that each of us individually can take care of our well-being in a much more active way. And so try some of these out and see how they work for you. One of the biggest things you can do for your workplace, if you are a supervisor or a manager, is to reduce uncertainty in the workplace. That will help as a de-stressor. It also will create, because it's reducing stress in the individuals around you, that you are actually creating more opportunity for trust and safety. And in many of our workplaces, you know, we live with uncertainty every day. So what you need to do is think about, or I invite you to think about, what are the simple things that I can actually reduce uncertainty around? And for one of the research really shows that you can reduce an incredible amount of stress in employees' lives if you look at the workload management and you look at scheduling. And there is enough time for people's schedule. That we did some work with the trucking industry. And so that is like scheduling for some industries is hugely a challenge for anyone who is managing that. So scheduling, the more you can give people, reduce that uncertainty about what's my schedule over the next 6 weeks, 2 weeks, the more advance notice, certainty, involvement of them in actually having some autonomy to be able to set that schedule. All of those things actually are very, very good for reducing stress and uncertainty. And when you do that, you are creating, and it's not to say that you can get everything out of the way, but the things that you can actually manage to create more certainty around, absolutely do that. Because there's more than enough uncertainty to go around. So being sort of thoughtful as a team or as a group, having conversations about what are our stressors? What is causing uncertainty? Do we need more conversations? Do we need to be able to have some things at the end of the day when we've had a very stressful day to come together, tailgate meeting, and talk about it and process it through so that we can reduce the uncertainty? Because every one of us, when we're having a stressful day, if we don't get to process that, there is a cumulative effect. And so you want to be able to collectively process something. If a great big piece of equipment didn't work, or you got behind, all of those things, everyone disperses and goes home. But if you can talk about that particular, all of that uncertainty that happened all day long, where you weren't sure that you could get done what you needed done, you want to be able to process that. And so taking those moments to really think about where are the moments of uncertainty that we can do something about, then you can create that greater predictability and you're going to reduce the stress. More information and transparency. Everyone wants to know why. All of us want to know why. So the more that a supervisor can share a little bit more about what's going on, then your uncertainty is also reduced. You're reducing uncertainty, you're reducing stress. So all of those tips are just ways to create a workplace that can create space for psychological safety, trust, and more certainty is a way to do that. The other thing you can do, which is around thinking about all of the positives that happen at work, the more that you can identify and actually celebrate the positives, because our brains are always wired to look for the negative. So we can figure out 10 negatives for every one positive. The more you can create those purposefully, the more you can create greater space for trust and security and certainty, and therefore psychological safety. So it strengthens safety and trust. So happiness and joy, two separate emotions. So for happiness, you're thinking about the climate, not the culture. This is about climate. So if you pause to celebrate when you finish a big project and you go, whatever it is, that moment of happiness that it's done, it's out the door, it's over, taking those moments actually increases motivation without you knowing it to come back more motivated to the next project, because we know they're not going to stop, or hopefully they're not going to stop. There's going to be more of them, because that's what pays us. So we're like, yes, more projects, bring more projects in, but creating those moments, those absolute moments that say, oh no, we're not just going home. We are going to stop and say, oh my gosh, we got that done. Oh, we got that done. And just like take it in and actually visibly and viscerally live it, because you need that. Humans need that to be motivated to the next big project, or it becomes unending and then it feels like the work never ends, and that actually can be a stressor. And joy. So joy is that complex emotion, and it actually has to do with culture. A workplace that has this culture of trying to unlock joy at work. And here's a practice. So a practice or a policy where maybe an employee, and I know these are challenging things to do and implement, however, this is what's accessible to you. If a person gets to try out different work experiences, gets to transfer to another, work on a project or assignment, and gets to figure out what are their best strengths and how that's going to, and it's a great match for value for the organization or the business, that actually gives you an opportunity to figure out some joy and how to unlock joy. So the more opportunities you have to say, okay, wow, I got to do that yesterday, and I was totally in a flow and enjoy, that's what joy looks like. That's not happiness. Happiness is around that celebratory thing, and it's more fleeting. Joy actually is unique and specific to you. And lots of us will have happiness about a similar thing, but joy is typically internal and it's only to you. You will have joy with sometimes the quirkiest things you find joyful, and that someone else would not find joyful. But that's because joy is very, very specific. And it's always when we're using our best strengths matched to the task. So that's the takeaway there. So here's the definition of, the ideal workplace: a workplace built on mutual trust and respect, cooperation, inclusion, belonging, growth, positive challenge, stress, which means we give each other a big goal out there, but we support each other as we go to get it. That is what challenge stress. It can't be so unrealistic because that becomes demotivating. So if we are supported with new skills or tools or opportunities to be able to do that particular project, that is challenge stress. And it's a balance of a goal that's out there, but one that's going to take some work and some effort. And also have fun and have joy at work. Those bring back joy into the workplace. So I invite you to maybe think about one thing that you heard, you observed, or you want to go back to the workplace and look differently at the workplace, or notice some things a little bit differently, and choose one thing that you can change for yourself or dial up. And maybe it is saying hello to everyone every single time you see them every day. Even if you're walking through wherever it is and you just did it 17 times, do it 18 times. That actually will, it probably would annoy them, but still, it's a really good thing for psychological health and safety. But just choose one thing that you can change, or one conversation that maybe you can inject into one of your team meetings that sparks a conversation around positive mental health, that we have some control to be able to change the psychological health and safety, and that's going to implement something good for everyone, because it's just a change that we want to have across the entire organization or the entire team, and doing more positive things that create joy, happiness, team spirit, motivation, engagement, all of those things that show up for us when we thrive at work and available to us because work is special. And so whatever you can do to de-stress too, share some of the de-stressing things. And you can always reach out to Coralie on Instagram and me on LinkedIn. And we're happy to answer any questions. And I think we might have, we're like a minute over. Sorry about that, Arpina and Ashley. But we're happy to stick around and answer any questions anybody has.
How can we get the slides?
We don't actually share slides, but what I can do, we do have a recording of this that you can watch again because it's developed from all of our research and our intellectual property. But what I will do is I will do up a participant, some slides that like a shorter deck, and I'll send them off to you folks, and that you can have that sort of some of those reminder slides that are probably the ones that you're probably looking for.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'd love to be able to share with the rest of the girls here at work. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, I see a question in the chat, Kim. Happy for the Canadian perspective. How does the workplace climate differ in Canada from the US?
Yeah, we probably have so many similar things that are, there would be differences in legal minimums, though I think I mentioned that we suck. Yeah, it's like our legislation in some areas for psychological health and safety is changing. So because we have the national standard, but the climate itself, I think there are many, many similar things. I don't know if I would say that there's anything different where, I think we're all equally motivated. We're all equally, we've all gone through the pandemic in different ways, and yet some similar ways. And the numbers and the statistics in the US and in Canada are very similar in terms of some of the challenges in workplaces. Traditional industries, I would say that when we think about and look at it by industry, I think industry to industry, there is definitely variances, but I think within an industry, there are probably some very similar things in terms of the work and the work conditions.
And does Canada have workplace gun violence?
We have had instances where challenges have come into the workplace. we've had it just over in the last little while. We actually had a couple of instances where there have been interventions and someone has been stopped from carrying out violence in the workplace. Interestingly, this is not so much about that particular thing, but we actually have new legislation federally for domestic violence that actually, if you are a federally regulated industry in Canada, then you actually, there's a new piece of legislation that if a partner of someone is at your workplace that is in a situation where there is domestic violence, and the ownership, or I guess the onus is on the organization to take a much more, not that there's responsibility, but to up the care and the support for the individual. And so leaves and things like that are something that there's more, I think, more flexibility around that now than there was. And that's just happened actually in January of this year. So that's sort of an evolving area as well, which is the protection of someone who's experiencing domestic violence, that your workplace is now required to support you in that.
Thanks. Another one, what would be your best advice to handle those that meet legal requirements on workplace behavior, but skate by with psychologically unsafe behaviors in the workplace? What would be a way to address meetings, personal improvement plans? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, it is very contextual driven. It is a very difficult, there are a lot of challenges, and the legislation and the legal framework is evolving. However, it is still very early for many organizations, even the most innovative organizations that are always have really good internal folks who are trying to figure out how to integrate continuous improvement in all areas of workforce development and those kinds of things. It has been my experience, and the research shows us, that if you can start to create a learning environment, learning has been one of the only things that has helped the human race. And so I like to apply that. If there's opportunity for personal development, and as adults, we actually have 5 stages of adulthood. So at 25, there's a lot of research that says our brains are developed at 25. Well, there's a whole bunch of other things that are not. So where, as you get older, the wisdom, hopefully wisdom, if you've gone through different stages, we are continuously learning and growing and developing. And the more encouragement and support an organization can have for that kind of development, and all kinds of different kinds of learning, technical learning for sure, but developmental learning inside an organization about growth and sort of capacity to understand yourself and understand people and others, that is going to go a long ways. And yes, starting to have the conversation about what are the standards. If there is a respectful workplace policy is a good place to start. As well, and then the supervisors helping to ensure that there are reminders about that. And the difficulty sometimes, if it's a supervisor that really struggles with conflict, and so those are the skills that need to be developed there on how they can actually develop themselves to be more comfortable telling someone what are the behavioral standards, both psychologically and behaviorally, that are required in our workplace. And then them being supported by whoever their manager is and their manager is. So it typically is around what is the psychological safety overall, because if a manager or supervisor is hesitant to address something that is really obviously highly negative or highly toxic or critical inside an organization, those things are going to have an impact on people, and you need to address them. They will not go away. They will not go away on their own. Research shows that they don't go away. So they need to be addressed. There needs to be some kind of intervention. And maybe it is for introducing some of the mental health topics and having, that's sometimes a really good window to start upping the conversations around mental health and creating some more emotional awareness of the impact of us and the fact that we are fully integrated humans. And even if we sometimes compartmentalize, they're still going to affect us when there is negativity around us. There's a lot of really good, we could have conversations about bystander, like lateral violence or bystander harm. When there is a toxic, negative work environment, the harms are not just on the people who are involved in that. The harms actually exist in a greater, across the team that may have been there and experienced it and see it every day. Those people are also being impacted by the climate that's been created by a particular dynamic at work. And sometimes you need intervention and some restoration.
Kim, I hate to do this.
Oh yeah, that's it. Sorry. I know I went on there, Sheila. I apologize.
No, just out of respect for people's time and your time. And I know we have to at some point wrap this up. And I know you have so much information and you could talk for hours with us. And we'd hear so many great things, but I think we're going to have to wrap up.
Yes.
And I really want to thank you and Coralie for the information that you presented here today. I think, this conversation really needs to go on. I want to thank all of you who participated. And I know so many people probably had to jump off for their next meeting. So we've lost a lot of people as we've gone on here past our time. But, thank you to everyone who signed in. There is, as Kim said, a recording that'll be available on the website. If you missed some things or wanted to go back and listen again. And, really thanks again, Kim and Coralie. Hopefully we'll continue the conversations down the road.
We'd love to. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all for coming, showing up and sticking it out, and hopefully have a watch on the recording, get some more things, capture some screenshots of ideas as well if you watch the recording again. And we will put together a little package and send it off to Sheila and our Penne, and so that you can have something in physical form as well.
Yeah, and I want to thank Ashley for putting this together with you. And I think she had to jump off, but
yeah,
I'll thank her anyway. She can hear it on the recording, and our PNA too.
All right, thank you, Sheila, so much for inviting.
All right,
Thanks so
bye-bye.
much.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye, everyone.
you.